They robbed the wrong bank. Inside was the most feared bounty hunter in the West. The Silver Ridge National Bank had never been robbed. 3 walls of solid stone, an impenetrable German vault, and a reputation that kept away even the boldest bandits. But that July morning in 1884, 5 men decided that streak would end. They burst through the doors shouting, firing at the ceiling, sowing panic throughout the marble-floored interior. Everyone on the ground. This is a robbery. The leader, a brutal man named Wade Hutchinson, aimed his shotgun at the teller, a thin man with spectacles who had worked at the bank for 15 years without incident. The vault. Open it now. The customers threw themselves to the floor, trembling, women crying, children screaming, men with their hands raised high, all except one. In the corner of the bank, seated in a wooden chair with a gray hat covering his face, there was an old man who did not move an inch, as if the chaos around him were merely a bad dream from which he did not wish to awaken. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. But the old man remained perfectly still, his breathing slow and measured, his weathered hands resting calmly on his knees. Wade noticed him immediately. The stillness of the man was unnatural, almost defiant in its tranquility. He approached furiously, his boots thundering on the wooden floor, and knocked the hat off with a violent swipe of his hand. "Are you deaf, old man?" I said on the ground. The old man slowly raised his gaze. He had a face weathered by decades of merciless sun, exposure to elements that had carved lines deep into his skin like canyons in desert stone. A scar crossed from his eyebrow to his jawline, a memento from a knife fight in Abilene many years ago. But it was his eyes that stopped Wade cold. Gray eyes like cooled steel, eyes that had seen too many men die, eyes that held no fear, no surprise, only a calm assessment of the situation before him. The old man remained seated, hands on his knees, calm as stagnant water before a storm. And then Wade saw the badge, small, worn, half hidden beneath the vest of the old man. A 5-pointed star, and engraved on it a name that froze his blood solid. Silas Crane. The Silent Hawk. The bounty hunter who never failed. The man who had delivered more than 60 outlaws to the gallows, and he was sitting right in front of them. The color drained from Wade's face like water from a broken barrel. He took an involuntary step backward, his shotgun wavering slightly in his suddenly sweaty grip. Behind him, his men continued shouting at the terrified customers, oblivious to the catastrophe that had just unfolded. They had no idea who sat before them. They had no idea that their simple bank robbery had just become something far more dangerous. Silas Crane had arrived in Silver Ridge 3 days before. He had come from Arizona following the trail of the Dalton brothers. 2 killers with a price of $5,000 on each of their heads. He had tracked them across half the territory, sleeping under the stars on hard ground, eating jerky that tasted like leather, drinking water from contaminated rivers that made his stomach churn. At his age, his body no longer responded as it once had. His knees ached every morning, joints stiff and protesting. His back cracked when he mounted his horse, a sound like dry wood splitting. But his hands remained steady, his eyes remained sharp, and his instinct remained intact, honed by 2 decades of hunting the most dangerous men in the West. The Daltons had died 2 days ago. Silas found them in a decrepit brothel on the outskirts of a mining town, drunk and careless, celebrating a recent stagecoach robbery with cheap whiskey and cheaper company. It was quick, clean, professional. 2 shots, 2 bodies, 2 bounties collected. One of them had not even managed to draw his weapon before Silas put a bullet between his eyes. The other had tried to flee through the back window and received a bullet in the spine for his trouble. Now Silas just wanted to collect his money and leave, retire once and for all. Buy a piece of land in Montana, build a cabin with his own hands, spend his final years in peace tending to a small garden, and maybe some chickens. He had seen enough blood for 3 lifetimes, witnessed enough death to populate a cemetery, but fate had other plans. That morning he entered the bank early, just as the doors opened for business. The line was long, citizens conducting their daily financial transactions with the patience of people who had nowhere urgent to be. Silas sat down to wait in the corner, away from the windows and with a clear view of the entrance. Old habits died hard. He tilted his hat over his face, closed his eyes, and let the morning sounds wash over him. 10 minutes later, the doors burst open with a crash that made the windows rattle. 5 men, red masks covering their faces, long guns, shouts of intimidation echoing off the high ceiling. Silas did not move. With his eyes closed, he evaluated the situation using only sound, a skill he had perfected over countless encounters. By the sound of the boots, he calculated 5 attackers, their footsteps heavy and uncoordinated. By the weight of their steps, none were professionals. Their movements lacked the precision of experienced criminals. By their nervous shouts and the tremor in their voices, this was their first major job. Amateurs, dangerous because they were unpredictable, but manageable if he remained calm and thought clearly. He opened his eyes when Wade tore the hat from his face. He studied the leader with the practiced gaze of a man who had sized up hundreds of criminals. 30-something years old, probably closer to 35. A scar on his neck, likely from a rope burn, suggesting he had been hanged once and survived or escaped. Hands calloused from years of hard labor, an ex-cowboy turned bandit, the worst kind because they knew the terrain, understood survival in harsh conditions, but lacked the discipline that came from military training or organized crime. They were driven by desperation and greed, a volatile combination that made them prone to violence. Wade saw the badge and went pale, the blood draining from his face so quickly Silas could almost see it happen. His mouth opened slightly, his breath catching in his throat. Behind him, one of his men noticed Wade's reaction and tensed. Another kept his gun trained on the teller, who stood frozen with his hands in the air, praying silently that he would live to see his wife and children again. The youngest of the bandits, barely 20 years old by Silas's estimation, shifted nervously from foot to foot, his trigger finger twitching dangerously on his rifle. Silas rose slowly, deliberately, giving his old joints time to comply with his brain's commands. His knees protested with sharp jabs of pain, but his presence filled the space, commanding attention without need for words or threats. Despite his age, despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face, there was something about him that projected danger. An aura that came from having faced death so many times that it had become an old acquaintance rather than a feared stranger. The other 4 bandits immediately swung their weapons toward him, barrels pointing at his chest, his head, his legs. 5 guns against one unarmed old man. The odds seemed clear, but appearances could be deceiving. "Gentlemen," Silas said with a voice as calm as a still pond, his tone conversational despite the guns pointed at him. "You are making several mistakes. The first was entering this bank. The second was not checking who was inside before you began your robbery." Wade took a step backward, his confidence crumbling like a sandstone cliff in a rainstorm. His men exchanged confused glances, uncertain why their leader suddenly seemed so afraid of one old man. "And the third?" one of them asked, his voice trembling slightly, betraying the false bravado he tried to project. Silas smiled, but it was a cold smile, devoid of humor or warmth, the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey that did not yet realize it was being hunted. "The third mistake was waking me up. I am not pleasant when my rest is disturbed, and I have not slept well in 3 days." The temperature in the bank seemed to drop several degrees despite the July heat outside. The name Silas Crane was a legend whispered in taverns and outlaw camps from Texas to California, from the Mexican border to the Canadian territories. Some said he was immortal, that bullets passed through him like he was made of smoke. Others claimed he had made a pact with the devil himself, trading his soul for supernatural speed and accuracy. The more rational simply feared him for what he actually was, a man who had dedicated his life to hunting other men and had never failed to bring in his quarry, dead or alive, though most often dead. He had started as a marshal in Texas, right after the Civil War ended, and left the country bleeding and broken. He witnessed how law and order collapsed on the frontier, how good men died while bad men prospered in the chaos. When his wife Elizabeth was murdered by Confederate deserters in the spring of 1867, something inside him broke irreparably. She had been tending their small garden when they came. 5 men drunk on stolen whiskey and rage at losing the war. They killed her for the few dollars she had hidden in a jar and set fire to their home. Silas came back from town to find only ashes and her body. He buried her under a cottonwood tree and resigned from his marshal position the next day. He became a bounty hunter, and he was merciless, driven by a cold fury that never quite burned out. He did not shoot to wound. He did not negotiate with his targets. He did not accept bribes, no matter how much money was offered. If the law sought you, he would find you, and when he found you, your choices were simple: surrender peacefully or die violently. Most chose to fight, believing they could outdraw him or outrun him. All of them were wrong. In 20 years, he had captured or killed 63 criminals, murderers who had slaughtered entire families, rapists who preyed on innocent women and children, bank robbers who stole the life savings of hardworking people, cattle rustlers who destroyed the livelihoods of ranchers. He did not discriminate in his hunting. If the law wanted you, he would find you, no matter how far you ran or how well you hid. The bandits began to fear him more than they feared the gallows, because Silas did not kill quickly or mercifully. He tracked his prey for weeks, months if necessary, wearing them down through relentless pursuit. He appeared when they slept, jolting them awake with the knowledge that death was near. He appeared when they ate, spoiling their appetite with dread. He appeared when they thought they were finally safe, shattering their illusions of escape. Like a silent hawk hunting from the heights, circling patiently until the moment was right to strike, he was patient and inevitable, qualities that made him more terrifying than any gunslinger who relied solely on speed. Now in the bank, Wade Hutchinson felt that ancestral fear rising in his chest like floodwater. He had heard the stories around campfires and in saloons. He knew men who had seen Crane in action, witnessed his cold efficiency and ruthless determination. None of them wanted to see him again. Those who survived his encounters were broken men, haunted by nightmares and jumping at shadows. "Listen, Crane," Wade said, trying to keep his voice firm despite the tremor he could not quite suppress. "We do not want trouble. We just want the money, and then we will leave. You can go back to your nap and pretend you never saw us." Silas took a step forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor with a sound like a judge's gavel. The bandits instinctively stepped back, their formation breaking as fear overcame training they never properly had. "You already have trouble," Silas said quietly, his gray eyes moving from face to face, cataloging each man and assessing which would break first. "I am the trouble. I am what happens when you make poor choices and believe you can escape the consequences." Jesse Snake Caldwell, nervous and young with wild eyes that darted around the room, shouted with false confidence, "We are 5 and you are 1. You are old. Do the mathematics, Grandpa. We have you surrounded and outgunned." Silas looked at him with those gray, emotionless eyes that had watched too many young fools die before their time. "Old, yes," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "But I still breathe." "And every man who said something similar to what you just said, every single one of them is no longer breathing. They are buried in graves scattered across the West, their names forgotten except by the families who mourn them. Would you like to join them in the dirt, boy?" The teller, trembling behind the counter with sweat running down his face and soaking his collar, recognized the tension building in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. This was going to end in blood. He had worked in banks for 20 years and developed an instinct for violence. He could see it in the tightening of shoulders, the whitening of knuckles on gun grips, the subtle shifts in stance that preceded gunfire. He wanted to run, to flee through the back door and keep running until he reached home, but his legs would not obey. Fear had frozen him in place as effectively as iron chains. Wade aimed his shotgun directly at Silas's head, the twin barrels like dark eyes of death staring him down. The distance between them was perhaps 10 feet, close enough that even a poor shot could not miss, close enough that the scatter from the shotgun would tear a man's head clean off his shoulders. "Last chance, old man. Get on the ground or I will blow your brains across this nice clean floor." The other customers whimpered, pressed flat against the floor, praying this nightmare would end without them becoming victims. Silas did not move. His hands remained at his sides, relaxed and ready. His breathing stayed calm and even. He looked directly into Wade's eyes with an expression that conveyed neither fear nor anger, only a cold certainty of what was about to happen. "Try it," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the silent bank. "Pull that trigger if you think you are fast enough. But know this, if you miss, if that shot does not kill me instantly, you will be dead before your finger leaves the trigger for a second shot." And in that moment, Wade Hutchinson knew with absolute certainty that he had made the worst mistake of his life. He could see his death in the old man's eyes, see it as clearly as if it had already happened. His hands began to shake slightly. Sweat trickled down his spine, His mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to lower the weapon, to apologize, to beg for mercy and run from this place as fast as his legs could carry him. But pride and fear of appearing weak before his men kept the shotgun raised. He was trapped by his own bravado, committed to a course of action he desperately wished he could reverse. Everything happened in less than 3 seconds, though to those present it seemed to unfold with the slow clarity of a nightmare. Wade squeezed the trigger of his shotgun, his finger pulling back with the weight of his poor decision. The blast thundered like a cannon inside the bank, the sound so loud it made ears ring and set off ringing that would last for hours. But Silas was no longer there. The old man had moved with speed impossible for his age, his body remembering decades of training and combat even as his joints protested the sudden movement. He rolled to his right, his shoulder hitting the floor hard enough to bruise, but moving him out of the path of the shotgun blast. The buckshot tore apart the wooden chair where he had been sitting an instant before, splinters flying through the air like wooden shrapnel. Before Wade could rack another shell into the chamber, before his brain could process that his target had somehow dodged at point-blank range, Silas already had his Colt 45 in his hand. The revolver seemed to appear there by magic, drawn with such smooth, practiced speed that no one saw the actual movement. A single shot, clean and precise as a surgeon's cut, rang out. The bullet traveled across the space between them and punched through Wade's right shoulder, exactly where Silas had aimed, striking the bone and shattering it, rendering the arm instantly useless. The shotgun clattered to the floor with a heavy metallic thud. The leader of the bandits screamed, a raw sound of shock and pain, and collapsed against the counter, his wounded shoulder bleeding profusely, blood soaking through his shirt and dripping onto the polished wood floor. The other 4 bandits reacted late, their minds struggling to comprehend what had just happened. They opened fire wildly, without aim or discipline, panic overriding any pretense of training. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of gunfire that echoed and re-echoed off the walls and high ceiling. Bullets whistled through the air like angry hornets. They shattered windows, sending glass cascading to the floor in glittering shards. They punched holes in walls, creating puffs of plaster dust. They destroyed furniture and decorations, the bank's orderly interior becoming a war zone in seconds. The civilians screamed in terror, pressing themselves as flat as possible against the floor, praying that a stray bullet would not find them, that they would survive this madness to see their families again. Silas moved between the desks and furniture with surprising fluidity for a man his age, his body responding to muscle memory built over decades of similar situations. He had been in more gunfights than he could count, survived situations that should have killed him a dozen times over. His body remembered every movement, every technique learned through hard experience, and the mistakes of men who had not been as lucky or skilled. Pain shot through his knees with each movement, sharp and insistent. His back creaked and protested, muscles stiff from age and old injuries. But muscle memory proved stronger than discomfort. His movements were economical, efficient, no wasted motion or energy. Jesse Snake tried to flank him from the left, thinking he could catch the old man while he was focused on the others. He fired 3 times in rapid succession, his revolver bucking in his hand with each shot. All 3 bullets missed their target, one going wide, one hitting where Silas had been a moment before, the third embedding itself in a desk. Silas appeared from behind a filing cabinet, his gray eyes calculating angle and distance in a fraction of a second, and fired once. The bullet struck Jesse's revolver with the precision of a master marksman, the impact numbing his hand and sending the weapon flying across the room to clatter uselessly in a corner. Before the young bandit could react, before his shocked brain could process losing his gun, Silas was on him, moving with the predatory grace of a mountain lion. A strike with the butt of his Colt to the temple, delivered with just enough force to render unconscious without causing permanent damage, and Jesse crumpled to the floor, out of the fight. 2 down, 3 remaining. The odds were improving rapidly, though Silas did not think in terms of odds. He thought in terms of threats, prioritizing which needed to be neutralized first to ensure the safety of the civilians cowering on the floor. The remaining bandits, a fat man called Bull who wheezed when he moved, a nervous young man named Tommy whose hands shook so badly he could barely hold his rifle, and a silent Mexican named Raul whose dark eyes showed more intelligence and danger than his companions, took cover behind the bank counter, crouching low and trying to present smaller targets. "This is insane," Tommy shouted, his voice cracking with fear and approaching hysteria. "The old man is crazy. We need to get out of here. We need to run before he kills us all." But Raul, the most experienced of the group and the only one who had killed men before this day, knew the terrible truth of their situation with cold clarity. "We cannot leave," he said in heavily accented English, his voice surprisingly calm. "He will kill us in the street before we reach our horses. Out there we have no cover, no protection. Here at least we have the counter and furniture. Here at least we might survive if we are smart and lucky." Bull, sweating profusely despite the morning coolness, his shirt soaked through and his face red from exertion and fear, looked at Wade writhing in pain on the floor, blood pooling beneath him in an expanding crimson puddle. "Wade, what do we do? Tell us what to do. We need a plan." Wade, pale as bleached bone, with blood soaking through his shirt and forming a dark stain that spread with each beat of his racing heart, whispered with a voice broken by pain and the crushing realization of his failure, "Pray. Pray that he wants to take us alive for the bounty money. Because if he decides dead is easier, we will all be corpses in the next minute." The taste of copper filled his mouth, shock beginning to set in, his body trembling as blood loss weakened him. Silas reloaded his revolver with practiced movements, his fingers working automatically through a routine performed thousands of times before. He flicked open the cylinder, ejected the spent brass, pulled fresh cartridges from his belt, and slid them smoothly into the chambers. 6 new bullets, more than sufficient for 3 remaining amateurs. He snapped the cylinder closed with a flick of his wrist, the metallic click loud in the momentary silence. He peered around his position and called out with a voice clear and commanding, cutting through the fear and chaos. "I am giving you 10 seconds to surrender. After that I will not ask again. I will simply act, and you will not like the results." Absolute silence fell over the bank like a heavy blanket. Even the wounded Wade stopped his groaning, holding his breath. The civilians dared not move. The very air seemed to stop circulating, as if the building itself held its breath. And then Silas began to count, each number falling like a hammer blow, like the ticking of a clock counting down to execution. 10. His voice was cold, methodical, without hurry or emotion. 9. Behind the counter, the 3 bandits exchanged desperate looks, eyes wide with terror. Bull was shaking so violently he could barely hold his rifle, the barrel wavering and dancing despite his attempts to steady it. Tommy was crying silently, tears streaming down his young face, mucus running from his nose, his body racked with suppressed sobs. Only Raoul maintained some composure, his jaw set with grim determination, his mind racing through impossible scenarios, searching for some escape that did not exist. 8. The count continued inexorably, each number bringing them closer to violence and death. 7. Suddenly Raoul made a decision born of desperation. "We have hostages," he shouted, his accent thickening under stress. He reached out and grabbed a woman by her hair, his fingers tangling in the brown strands as he dragged her roughly to her feet. She screamed, a sound of pure terror that pierced the air. He pulled her in front of him as a human shield, pressing his revolver against her temple hard enough to leave a mark on her skin. "If you come closer, I kill her. I swear I will do it. Do not test me, old man." Silas stopped counting, his concentration shifting to this new development. His eyes narrowed, the gray irises darkening with something that might have been anger, though his face remained expressionless. "Bad move, son," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of judgment. "Very bad move. Using innocent people as shields only makes me angry, and you really do not want that." The woman sobbed in terror, her body rigid with fear. She was young, perhaps 25 years old, wearing a modest green dress, her chestnut hair pulled back in a bun that was now disheveled from Raoul's rough handling. She was someone's daughter, perhaps someone's wife, with a life and dreams and people who loved her. And now she might die because she had chosen the wrong day to visit the bank. Raoul pressed the gun barrel harder against her temple, his hand remarkably steady despite the situation. "I am serious, old man. Drop your weapon or she dies. I have nothing to lose now. You have already killed my friends. What is one more death to me?" The other civilians held their breath, some closing their eyes, not wanting to witness what might happen next. The bank teller prayed harder, his lips moving silently as he begged God for mercy and salvation. Silas slowly emerged from his cover, his movements deliberate and unthreatening, hands raised high with the Colt dangling loosely from his index finger by the trigger guard. "Easy, son," he said in a soothing voice, the tone one might use to calm a spooked horse. "Nobody wants innocent people to die here today. There has been enough violence. Let her go and we can talk about this like reasonable men. You can still walk away from this alive and relatively unharmed." Raoul smiled with relief, thinking he had gained the upper hand and found his path to escape. "That is right. Now throw down your weapon and back away. Do it slowly. No sudden moves or the woman pays the price for your heroics." Bull and Tommy watched with desperate hope, thinking perhaps they had found a way out of this nightmare after all. The shot was so quick that nobody saw it coming, so fast it seemed to exist outside of normal time. Silas had released the revolver, let it begin to fall from his hand, and in the same fluid motion drew a derringer hidden in his boot, a tiny two-shot pistol he kept for exactly such emergencies. The small weapon fired once, the report sharp and angry. The bullet passed so close to the hostage's ear that it singed a few hairs, leaving a burning smell, and buried itself directly between Raoul's eyes. The Mexican bandit's head snapped back, his expression freezing in eternal surprise. He was dead before his brain could process what had happened, before his finger could tighten on the trigger. He fell backward, his body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings, and crashed to the floor with a heavy thud. The woman screamed and broke free, stumbling away from the dead body at her feet. She ran toward the exit, her screams echoing behind her, her dress stained with blood that was not her own. The other civilians took advantage of the moment, scrambling to their feet and fleeing through the doors in a panicked rush, pushing and shoving in their desperation to escape. In seconds, the bank emptied, leaving only Silas, the two remaining bandits frozen in shock, Wade bleeding out slowly on the floor, and Jesse still unconscious from the blow to his head. "Impossible," Bull whispered, his voice barely audible, his mind unable to accept what his eyes had witnessed. "How? How did you make that shot? The distance, the angle, the risk to the hostage. It was impossible. The shot of a legend or a demon, not a mortal man." Silas calmly retrieved his Colt from where it had fallen, checked it for damage though he knew there would be none, blew across the barrel of the derringer from which smoke still curled, and returned the small weapon to its hiding place in his boot. "Practice," he answered simply, as if discussing the weather or the price of cattle. 50 years of practice. 10,000 shots fired in training for everyone fired in combat. Dedication, discipline, and the understanding that perfection is the only acceptable standard when innocent lives hang in the balance. Tommy dropped his weapon immediately, the rifle clattering on the floor, his hands shooting up above his head in surrender. "I give up. I surrender. Please do not kill me. I do not want to die. I have a mother waiting for me at home." I promised her I would visit next month. Bull quickly imitated him, his own weapon joining Tommy's on the floor. "Me too. We surrender. We give up. You win. Just please let us live." Silas nodded approvingly, a slight inclination of his head. "Good decision. The smart one. You boys just saved your own lives by choosing wisdom over foolish pride." He approached Wade, who was breathing with difficulty, each breath a struggle as blood loss weakened him and shock set in. "Hutchinson," he said, kneeling down with a grimace as his knees protested the movement. "I have a question for you, and I suggest you answer truthfully because you do not have much time left." Wade looked at him with glassy eyes, his face the color of old paper, his lips tinged with blue as his circulation faltered. "What?" His voice was barely a whisper, weak and thready. "You said 5 men, but I counted 6 horses outside when I arrived this morning. I noticed such details. They have saved my life more times than I can count. So where is number 6? Who else is here that I do not know about?" Silas's voice was calm but insistent, demanding truth while time remained. And in that moment, a shotgun racked behind him, the distinctive sound of a shell being chambered, metal sliding on metal with deadly intent. Click-clack, the sound every gunfighter dreads, the sound that means you have made a fatal mistake and death is standing behind you. "Do not move, old man. Not even a twitch, or I will cut you in half." The voice came from the direction of the vault, young and angry and dangerous. Silas did not turn, only closed his eyes and cursed himself mentally with every profanity he knew. He had become careless, allowed age and fatigue and overconfidence to cloud his usually perfect judgment. It was a beginner's error, the kind of mistake that got men killed, the kind of mistake he had not made in 20 years. But even legends grow old, and old men grow tired and make mistakes. Drop your weapon slowly, the voice commanded. I want to see it hit the floor and hear it clatter. No tricks. Silas obeyed, opening his hand and letting the Colt fall to the wooden floor where it landed with a metallic thud. Now turn around, the voice continued. Nice and slow. I want to see your face when I blow you to pieces. I want you to know who killed the great Silas Crane, the man who was supposed to be unkillable. Silas turned slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, and found himself facing the sixth man. He was young, perhaps 25 years old, but his eyes were old beyond his years, eyes that had witnessed violence too early in life and been forever changed by it. He wore dusty traveling clothes and carried a sawed-off shotgun pointed directly at Silas's chest from a distance of perhaps 6 feet. At that range, the blast would tear a man in half, armor and all. There would be no surviving such a shot. You must be Wade's son, Silas said with complete calm, as if they were meeting at a church social rather than in a Mexican standoff with death looming. His voice showed no fear, no concern, only mild interest. The young man blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off balance by the statement. How could you possibly know that? Nobody said anything about me. I stayed hidden in the vault like we planned. You have his same jaw, Silas observed, his gray eyes studying the young man's face with professional interest. Same bone structure, same stubborn set to your mouth. And unfortunately, the same stupidity that led him to rob a bank without checking who was inside first. He spoke conversationally, as if discussing the weather. The young man's teeth clenched, anger flashing across his face at the insult to his intelligence. My name is Cole Hutchinson, and you just killed half my crew. My father is bleeding out on the floor because of you. Men I rode with, men I knew, are dead because of you. Wade, still conscious despite his wounds and the blood loss that made the world swim in his vision, coughed up blood that spattered his lips and chin. Cole, son, get out of here while you still can. Run. Forget about me and save yourself. But Cole was not listening, his attention entirely focused on Silas with the intensity of youth and rage. All my life I heard stories about you, he said, his voice thick with contempt and barely controlled fury. The great Silas Crane, the unstoppable bounty hunter, the silent hawk who never missed, who never failed, who never showed mercy. He spat on the floor, the gesture filled with disgust. But all I see is a tired old man who got lucky today. Just a man who can bleed and die like anyone else. Then shoot, Silas responded without emotion, his voice flat and unconcerned, as if he were commenting on the likelihood of rain rather than his imminent death. Pull that trigger if you have the courage. Do what you came here to do. Cole hesitated, and in that hesitation, Silas saw everything he needed to know about the young man. There was something in the old man's tranquility that unsettled him deeply, as if death were merely another day at work, an appointment to be kept rather than a terror to be feared. You were in the vault working on the lock while your friends made the distraction with the customers, Silas continued, his voice still conversational. Intelligent strategy. Divide the attention. But ultimately not sufficient, because you forgot the most important rule of criminal enterprise. Always know your enemy before engaging. Shut up, Cole said, but his voice wavered, the shotgun trembling slightly in his hands. Your father is going to bleed to death in the next 10 minutes. Silas said matter-of-factly, stating simple truth without cruelty or satisfaction. Your companions are dead or captured, and you are alone, cut off from escape, with no plan beyond revenge. Do you really believe you will walk out of here alive after you shoot me? Have you thought beyond this moment? Cole looked at his father lying in an expanding pool of blood, and tears ran down his cheeks, cutting clean trails through the dust on his face. You took my family from me. You destroyed everything we were trying to build together. No, Silas corrected gently but firmly. Your father chose this path. He made the decisions that led to this moment. He could have been a cowboy, a rancher, a merchant, 100 honest things. But he chose to rob and steal and threaten innocent people. You, however, still have a choice. You can choose differently. You can be better than he was. A long, tense silence filled the bank, broken only by Wade's labored breathing and the distant sounds of the town outside. Normal life continuing while inside this building lives hung in the balance. And then slowly, as if the weight of the shotgun had become too much to bear, Cole lowered the weapon. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I do not want to die today, he said quietly, his voice that of a lost child rather than a hardened criminal. I thought I did. Thought revenge was worth dying for. But now that death is here, I find I want to live. Nobody wants to die. Silas agreed with a slight nod of understanding. Not really. Not when it comes down to the actual moment. He crouched down slowly, his knees protesting, to retrieve his weapon from the floor. And in that instant, Wade, using the last reserves of his fading strength, pulled a hidden knife from his boot and launched himself toward Silas with a scream of rage and desperation. The knife flashed in the air like silver lightning, the blade aimed directly at Silas's exposed throat in a final attempt to kill the man who had destroyed his plans and his life. Wade propelled himself from the floor with desperate speed, born of dying fury. Using muscles that should no longer have worked, driven by pure hate and the knowledge that he had nothing left to lose. The blade pointed straight at Silas's neck, aimed to sever the jugular and end the old bounty hunter's life in a spray of arterial blood. But Silas saw it coming, his peripheral vision catching the movement, his instincts screaming danger even before his conscious mind processed the threat. He spun on his heels with fluid economy of motion, decades of training overriding the limitations of his aging body. The knife passed within inches of his throat, so close he felt the breeze of its passage, close enough to have killed him if he had been even fractionally slower. With a movement as smooth as water flowing downhill, Silas grabbed Wade's wrist, his fingers closing like iron bands on the tendons and bones. He twisted hard, applying leverage and force in exactly the right place with the precision of a man who had disarmed hundreds of opponents. A dry crack, the sickening sound of breaking bone, and the knife fell from nerveless fingers to clatter on the blood-slick floor. Wade screamed in agony, his broken wrist hanging at an unnatural angle, adding new pain to his already overwhelming suffering. Silas pushed him back to the floor, not roughly but with firm inevitability, ending the threat. "Father!" Cole shouted and raised the shotgun again, instinct and love for his dying father overriding reason and self-preservation. Silas had no choice, no time for negotiation or mercy. His Colt came up and fired once, the shot placed with the same perfect precision that had characterized all his shooting that day. The bullet impacted Cole's shotgun, tearing it from his hands with such force that it sent him spinning and falling backward. He crashed against the wall and then slid down to sit on the floor, uninjured but completely disarmed, his hands numb from the impact, his ears ringing from the gunshot. Wade coughed blood, great gouts of it that poured from his mouth and nose, the shoulder wound having finally done its fatal work. The flow had not stopped, and now his body was shutting down, organs failing one by one as blood pressure dropped to critical levels. "Finish it," he whispered with a voice barely audible, broken by pain and defeat and the knowledge of his own imminent death. "Do it, you coward. Put a bullet in my brain and end this suffering. Give me that much mercy at least." Silas looked down at him with something that might have been pity in his cold gray eyes. "You are not worthy of another bullet," he said quietly but clearly. "You chose this life. You chose to threaten innocent people, to rob and steal and spread fear. The consequences are yours alone to bear." He turned toward Cole, who sat against the wall trembling with shock and emotion, tears streaming down his face. "Your father is going to die in a few minutes, maybe less," Silas said gently but firmly. "You have two choices. You can stay and watch him go, or you can leave now and save yourself from the gallows that surely await. Choose quickly." Cole stared at Wade with eyes full of tears and heartbreak and love for a father who had led him down a terrible path. "I cannot leave him alone to die," he protested weakly. "I cannot abandon him in his final moments." "Yes, you can," Silas said. "And you must. This is his death, not yours. Do not let it become yours as well." Wade, his voice barely a whisper, a thread of sound that required immense effort to produce, managed to speak through the blood filling his mouth. "Go, son. Please. I am begging you. Get out of here while you still can. Be better than I was. Learn from my mistakes. Make something good of your life instead of throwing it away in this place." His face was pale as death itself, lips blue, eyes losing their focus. Cole sobbed openly now, all pretense of toughness and criminality stripped away to reveal the frightened young man beneath. "Father, I do not know how to leave you. I do not know how to go on without you." The grief in his voice was palpable, real, a son watching his father die and being powerless to prevent it. Wade smiled weakly, blood staining his teeth, his life measured in heartbeats now. I love you, son. I always have. That never changed, even when I made terrible choices. Even when I failed you as a father should not fail his child. Take that love and build something better with it. Silas approached Cole, placed a hand on the young man's shoulder with surprising gentleness. Your father made many mistakes, too many to count, he said quietly. But right now, in this moment, he is giving you the chance not to repeat them. He is giving you the gift of life and a future. Take it. Honor him by becoming the man he should have been. Cole looked at Silas with a mixture of hate, pain, confusion, and something else, perhaps a glimmer of understanding. Then he looked at his father one last time, memorizing the face he would never see again in this life. I love you, Father. I will try to be better. I will try to make you proud somehow. Wade's smile grew slightly wider, his eyes softening. I am already proud, son. Just for surviving. Just for being stronger than I ever was. Now go. Run and do not look back. Cole stood on shaky legs, walked toward the door on feet that barely seemed to obey him, and then ran, his footsteps echoing through the bank and then fading as he fled into the street. The sound of horse hooves thundered seconds later, rapidly receding as Cole galloped away from Silver Ridge and toward whatever future awaited him. Silas knelt beside Wade, his old knees protesting but complying. The bandit was breathing with increasing difficulty, each breath more labored than the last, life escaping with each exhalation like water through cupped hands. Why did you let my son go? Wade asked with a voice fractured by approaching death. You could have arrested him, collected another bounty. Why show mercy when your reputation is built on being merciless? Silas looked toward the empty door, seeing not the present but the past, remembering another time and another young man who had been given a chance he did not deserve. Because someone let me go once, long ago when I was young and stupid and angry, he said softly, sharing a truth he rarely spoke aloud. And that choice changed my entire life. Made me think about justice versus vengeance, about mercy versus law. Your son deserves the same chance I was given. Wade coughed one last time, a wet rattling sound, and then stopped breathing altogether. His eyes remained open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling, his body still and peaceful in death. The bank fell into absolute silence, heavy and profound. Bull and Tommy, handcuffed together in a corner with iron bracelets biting into their wrists, did not dare to speak or even breathe loudly. Silas stood slowly, every joint protesting the movement. And then he heard the thunder of multiple horses approaching at speed, many riders coming fast. The sheriff had finally arrived. The bank doors burst open violently, hinges protesting. Sheriff Mark Stone entered with 4 deputies, rifles raised high and ready for war, their faces grim and determined. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the scene before them. 3 corpses cooling on the floor in spreading pools of blood, 2 bandits handcuffed and defeated, and Silas Crane sitting calmly in a chair cleaning blood from his revolver with a handkerchief, as casual as if he were cleaning dust after a ride rather than gore after a gunfight. Crane, the sheriff said with tension thick in his voice. What in the name of all that is holy happened here? This looks like a war zone, like a battlefield. Silas finished cleaning his weapon with methodical care before responding. Bank robbery, he said simply, his tone suggesting the events were routine and unremarkable. I stopped it. Nothing more complicated than that. Stone looked at the 3 dead men, their bodies twisted in the final positions of violent death. Stopped it or massacred them? There is a difference, Crane. And sometimes you blur that line. Silas shrugged, unconcerned by the implied criticism. Both, he admitted without shame or pride. They gave me no choice. I gave them opportunities to surrender. Some took it, some did not. Those who chose violence received violence in return. That is the nature of this work. The sheriff sighed deeply, the sound of a man dealing with complications he had hoped to avoid. He knew Silas's reputation well. Respected but controversial, effective but brutal, a man who got results but left bodies in his wake. Any survivors? He asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it officially. Silas pointed at Bull and Tommy, who cringed under the attention. Those 2 surrendered and will stand trial for their crimes. There is another who escaped, younger fellow, son of the leader there. I let him go because he was young and stupid, not evil. Sometimes you can see the difference if you look closely enough, if you care to see it, the potential for redemption versus the commitment to wickedness. He was redeemable. You let him go? Stone's voice rose in disbelief. Why would you let a criminal escape? That is not like you, Crane. Your reputation is built on never letting a target escape, never letting anyone you hunt remain free. Silas met his gaze steadily, his gray eyes calm and certain. Because he was young and stupid, not evil or broken, he repeated, there is a difference that matters. Because everyone deserves one chance at redemption, one opportunity to choose a different path. I was given that chance once. He deserved the same. One of the younger deputies, barely 20 years old and new to law enforcement, stared at the carnage with wide eyes and a face rapidly losing color. Dear God, he breathed, his voice shaking with shock and a touch of horror. Did you do all this alone? 1 man against 5? How is that even possible? The stories they tell do not seem real. But seeing this, maybe they are all true. Silas did not answer the question. He stood slowly, each joint in his body protesting the movement, every muscle aching from the exertion and adrenaline crash. He suddenly felt every one of his 68 years, felt the accumulated weight of 2 decades of violence and death pressing down on his shoulders like physical weight. Sheriff, do you have any charges against me? He asked, wanting this concluded so he could rest. Stone evaluated the situation carefully, his lawman's mind weighing evidence and circumstances and legal technicalities. Technically, Silas had acted in self-defense and in defense of the civilians who had been held hostage. The witnesses who had fled would confirm his version of events, would testify that he had given the bandits every opportunity to surrender peacefully. And 3 of the dead men had active bounties on their heads, legal rewards for their capture dead or alive. No, Stone finally said with reluctance. But I need your official statement for my records. The territorial governor will want a full report on this incident. Tomorrow, Silas said flatly, exhaustion suddenly crashing over him like a wave. Right now, I need sleep more than I need paperwork. My body is reminding me that I am too old for this kind of excitement. Stone nodded his understanding and acceptance. All right. Tomorrow morning at my office. But do not leave town until we have that statement in writing and signed. I need everything properly documented. Understood? Silas walked toward the door, passing deputies who watched him with expressions mixing fear and admiration and something like awe, as if they were witnessing a living legend. A figure stepped from folklore into reality. Crane, the sheriff called out as Silas reached the threshold. The old bounty hunter stopped but did not turn around. When are you going to retire from this life? When are you going to hang up your guns and settle down before this work kills you? Silas stood silently for a moment, considering the question he had asked himself 1,000 times. When there are no more evil men to hunt, he finally answered, his voice tired and worn. Or when an evil man hunts me first and proves faster or luckier, whichever comes first. Until then, this is what I am. This is all I know how to be. He stepped out of the bank into the brutal afternoon sun. The heat hit him like a physical force after the relative coolness of the bank's interior. The street was crowded with curious townspeople, drawn by the sound of gunfire, whispering among themselves and pointing. They parted before him like water before the prow of a ship, creating a path, their faces showing respect and fear in equal measure. He walked toward the boarding house where he had rented a room, his steps tired and uneven. His legs ached with deep bone weariness, his back burned with the fire of overexerted muscles and old injuries. His hands trembled slightly from adrenaline crash, the shaking visible to anyone who looked closely. He was old, far too old for this kind of work, too old to be getting into gunfights with desperate criminals. His body was telling him what his mind had known for years. It was time to quit, time to retire, time to find peace before death found him. But as he climbed the stairs to his boarding house room, one slow step at a time, a shadow moved in the dark alleyway across the street, barely visible in the gathering dusk. Someone was watching him with focused intensity, someone who had been waiting for this moment, planning for it, dreaming of it for years. Someone with a grudge and a gun and nothing left to lose. And Silas Crane, the legendary hunter who had tracked and captured 63 criminals, had just become the prey in someone else's hunt. The hunter was about to learn what it felt like to be hunted, To have death stalking his trail. The wheel of fate was turning, and the Silent Hawk's long flight might be approaching its final landing.